Going to get into this with Tucker. I think it was an important message, important video, so let's get into it.
The costs of this war to the United States are profound, and they have nothing to do with Iran's nuclear program or its navy, assuming it even had a navy. Did Iran have a navy? Who cares? Who cares about its nuclear program? Actually, Pakistan has a nuclear program. Lots of countries you don't think should have nuclear weapons, including Israel and France, have nuclear weapons. What matters in the end is whether the United States survives in recognizable form. And this war makes it less likely that it will. Not certain, it's not lights out or anything, but we are clearly on the road to radical destructive change in the United States accelerated by this war, and that's bad. And while we're at it, what about Iran? What's going to happen to Iran after all this? Well, of course, it's impossible to really know because this is so dynamic. Again, the announcement was made less than 20 minutes ago that we're back at war, and who knows where that will wind up. But if current trends continue, it seems pretty clear that Iran will emerge from this war stronger, battered, lots of dead people, lots of destroyed infrastructure, probably a refugee crisis, not much of a standing army maybe. Who knows? But it is very hard to believe that Iran will emerge from this without control. Maybe shared control with Oman, but still control of the Strait of Hormuz. And that one fact alone makes Iran a global player in the globalized economy. There is no getting around the fact that if you want to get your commodities out of the Gulf, through which a fifth of global commodities flow, energy, petrochemicals, you're going to have to deal with Iran. So that means that after months of war with Iran, this rogue state, this Middle Eastern North Korea run by crazy people who are cannibals or throwing gays off buildings for fun, that country becomes almost inevitably a real country that other real countries deal with as a peer country. It's also pretty easy to imagine an enhanced Iranian economy, because at some point, U.S. sanctions will either have to be dropped, reduced, or they will just become less meaningful because the U.S. dollar will not be dominant in the way that it is now. And finally, and this is not a minor point either, Iran's image around the world will be enhanced, and even in the region. Now, how would that happen? How would that work? How could Iran, which is not Arab, it's Persian, and the Persians and the Arabs do have a long history of animosity toward each other, but also intermarriage and complex relationship for sure, but some animosity.
And that's obviously Iran, the way the Shia live. They're a much more simple people. Look at the Ayatollah before he was martyred, peace be upon him. They live a very humble life, whereas the majority of the GCC are just family dictatorships. They idolize material goods. So that's where the main parting of the ways is.
The Persians and the Gulf Arabs. And it's not just religious difference, there are cultural differences and attitudinal differences that have caused friction between those groups for a long time. But already, Iran, which is bombing Arab countries and destroying Arab countries, is more popular in some Arab countries than it was at the beginning of the war. Now, how could that be?
Sorry, but they're bombing American bases. They're not taking a leaf out of the American and Zionist playbook with assassinations and punishing civilian, collective punishment. They're hitting military targets. The GCC have been complicit.
Well, because Iran has taken a clear position on the murder of Palestinian civilians, particularly in Lebanon, but not just Lebanon, in the West Bank and Gaza also. Iran has tied its ceasefire negotiations to a ceasefire in Lebanon. Now, that's not something that resonates with most Americans, like who cares? But in the Middle East and in the entire rest of the world, really, which is watching Israel destroy Lebanon for reasons that are not clear at all, murder Christians wholesale in Lebanon, destroy Christian villages, bomb Beirut, not a traditional Hezbollah stronghold. Why are you bombing Beirut? Unclear. But it's happening, and the rest of the world is watching carefully because Lebanon is a country a lot of people have been to, probably the most beautiful country in the world, with some of the most sophisticated people in the world. It's not Yemen. It's Lebanon. It's on the Mediterranean. And the rest of the world is watching this in horror, and no one's doing anything about it. The United States is abetting it. The United States is helping it happen, despite what they tell you. Those are American weapons and weapon systems being used to murder Christians in Lebanon. Who is doing something about it? Iran. Hate to say that. Wish that weren't true. Wish it didn't fall to Iran to do something about this, but it has, and they are. And they're doing more about this than any other country, including ours, including any of the Gulf states. Sorry. Because they are tying the reopening of the strait, which the world wants, to an end to Israeli bombing and murder in Lebanon. So in the eyes of the region, whatever people hate about Iran, and there's a lot that the Arabs hate about Iran, they are uniquely standing up for the Palestinians. The mass murder in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, and history will record it as that. It is genocide. It is a state policy to eliminate a people and transfer them out of a land. It is genocide by any definition, is the biggest thing that is happening at this point in history. It is the biggest thing. It is the thing about which the most will be written going forward. How did the rest of the world watch this and do nothing? How did the United States back this? How did the United States become the only country on the planet, other than Israel, to approve of this genocide? These are questions normal people will ask fairly soon. They're asking them now. And Iran, for all of its many faults, as an American, it's painful to admit this, has tried to do something about it. So long term, that doesn't hurt Iran, whatever their motive for doing that. That does not hurt Iran. That enhances Iran as a state. So the whole thing, like so much of life, has turned out to be exactly the opposite of what you thought.
And the West like to call Iran the axis of evil. And just on what he was saying there, how come Iran are the only ones sticking up for them? When I went to the mosque and I spoke with the imam at the Shia mosque in Newcastle, when he was speaking to me, he said we'll have three things: legal, faith, ethics. The legal is wherever we live by their laws. We live in England, so we'll abide by English law. Faith, what's inside you? What do you believe? And ethics, the first thing he said, how you live your life. We stick up for the oppressed, helping the oppressed people. That was the first thing that Imam said in Newcastle in England. That is part of their way of life, unlike us in the West. And I'll go along with what he said, apart from England, the UK, we are complicit in the genocide as well. We send weapon systems, aid. We abet. We are complicit in this genocide just as much as the Americans and just as much as the people holding the weapons, the Israelis.
You initiate a regime change war against Iran. You kill its elderly cleric head of state. You blow up a girls' school. You sink its ships. You decapitate its air force, whatever that was. You unleash the full fury of the largest military in human history on this country. And in the end, almost inevitably, that country becomes stronger and the countries that attack it become weaker. Again, only in real life do ironies like this exist, but they are everywhere. In fact, that is the story of life. The opposite happens. Who could have called this? Who could have seen this coming? Well, certainly almost no one in Washington saw this coming, because they've been talking about this war with Iran and the need to decapitate Iran and do something about Iran. America's biggest problem is Iran and their proxies and the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas. And they've been yammering on about this at the Brookings Institution and CNN and the Atlantic Council and every place where midwits with overpriced degrees gather to talk about the world that they don't understand, whose languages they don't speak. But whenever they gather in Washington to talk about the world, Iran is at the top of the list of problems we must solve. And in almost none of these gatherings has anyone piped up to say, well, wait a second, if we do that, the opposite will happen. Iran will become more powerful and will become less powerful. Almost nobody said that in Washington. Literally almost nobody. And if there is somebody, who is that person? There wasn't one. But there was at least one person outside of Washington who said this. His name is John Mearsheimer. He's been a professor at the University of Chicago since 1982, over 40 years. And he studies international relations, the way that countries get along with each other, balances of power regionally and globally. And he's smart and he's erudite, but above all, he is wise. He draws obvious conclusions from longitudinal data sets, as they say in academia. He looks at what happens over time and tries to understand what this tells us about the way nations behave and about the way people behave, about human nature, which is constant. It doesn't change. And because he is one of the very few people in the field of international relations who has this ability, married to personal bravery, he's willing to say things that are unpopular, which is the rarest of all qualities in academia. Because he has these two qualities, he has been maybe the only guy or one of the very few guys to call it right. Back in 2007, he and a friend of his from Harvard called Stephen Walt wrote a book on the so-called Jewish lobby, AIPAC, and the whole constellation of nonprofits in Washington that seek to steer the U.S. Congress and the executive, the White House, to giving Israel more money and more military aid, to changing the inherent priorities of American foreign policy, which are to protect and enhance the United States, to do things that are good for the population of America, to change that priority to protect Israel, do what Israel wants. And the two of them wrote this fairly famous book about it back in 2007 and were immediately attacked, can you guess, as Nazis and anti-Semites. Well, turns out neither of them was a Nazi or an anti-Semite, just the opposite. Kind of normal liberals, not racist in any sense. And the charge itself was ludicrous. You notice what AIPAC is doing? You're an anti-Semite? Feel like if you criticized Pfizer, you're against all science? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It's a slur. It's slander designed to make you be quiet. And in most cases, it works, which is why they keep doing it. But in this one specific case, it didn't work. John Mearsheimer, who had tenure at Chicago, did not lose his job. And not only did he keep speaking, he upped the volume of his speaking and kept telling the world, though most people didn't listen, what he had personally seen and how he interpreted that. In other words, why does the United States military go to war? And Mearsheimer, through close observation, concluded, well, in the modern era, mostly it goes to war, big wars on behalf of Israel. Here is Professor John Mearsheimer in 2007 describing why the U.S. went to war in Iraq.
It is manifestly clear to most Americans that the Iraq War is one of the greatest strategic blunders in American history. Our argument is that Israel, and especially the lobby, were two of the main driving forces behind the decision to invade Iraq. It is hard to imagine that war happening in their absence. To start with Israel, it was the only country besides Kuwait where both the government and a majority of the population favored the war. The Israeli government, to include Prime Minister Sharon, pushed the Bush administration hard to make sure that it did not lose its nerve in the months before the invasion. Other influential Israelis, like former Prime Ministers Ehud Barak and Benjamin Netanyahu, also implored the United States to take down Saddam. In fact, Israel was pushing so hard for war that its allies in the United States warned Israeli officials to damp down their rhetoric, lest it be seen as a war for Israel. I might also add that President Clinton said in 2006 that every Israeli politician I knew thought that Saddam was so great a threat that he should be removed even if he did not have WMD.
So you can see why Professor John Mearsheimer was considered threat number one by AIPAC, and we'll just use the phrase, and it's amen chorus, in the American media. Not because he's a bigot or a Nazi, but precisely because he is not. He's a eminently reasonable man who understands the facts and isn't afraid to say them. He's not acting out of animus. He's acting out of honesty and, in fact, decency. So you can't have people like John Mearsheimer talking. If people are going to criticize Israel, they should also be attacking Jews. They should be full-blown crazy people. People like that are helpful to the cause. People like John Mearsheimer tend to provoke an open, rational debate on the topic that AIPAC and the defenders of Israel's influence over the United States cannot possibly win because it doesn't make any sense.
And that's why they always shut down any dialogue. They do not want any dialogue. They don't want any pushback. Like Ben Shapiro, he won't debate these people who are serious about this topic because they don't have the answers. They've got away with so long with pushing their narrative with the Hasbara. And now everyone's got the internet. Everyone can see what's happening. Everyone can research it. Hopefully it's coming to an end. Hopefully.
At all. So they don't want to have the debate. So Mearsheimer was basically written out of the world he occupied. Though he is a full tenure professor at the University of Chicago, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, suddenly he wasn't getting invited to write a lot of New York Times op-eds. In fact, for many years, very few non-experts heard from him at all. But he kept saying the same thing, which is the Israeli government and its agents in the United States, registered and unregistered, are pushing the U.S. government toward outcomes that will hurt the United States. And now his ultimate vindication, the war in Iran. And not just the war in Iran, but the war between Russia and Ukraine, which is in fact a war between the United States and Russia. And we got into that war because of pressure from exactly the same people. The people who have pushed for war in Iran have spent the last 5 years pushing the United States to go to war with Russia. And that war is still ongoing because of pressure from those very same people. So where does this leave us now? Is either one of those wars going to end anytime soon? Is it possible that either one is resolved in a way that doesn't hurt the U.S.? And what is the motive behind getting the U.S. military, American taxpayers and service members involved in wars in Ukraine and Iran that can't possibly benefit us? Why would you want to do that? And why is our political class allowed it to happen? Those are some of the questions that we asked Professor John Mearsheimer in an interview that every person should listen to. As a gun owner.
And this is it, like, you've seen the smear tactics they use. Even the head of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, they've debunked him, death threats to him and his family, for trying to issue Netanyahu and Smotrich with arrest warrants. Like, if you don't conform and comply, they will come after you. But I strongly believe, if enough of us start speaking about this, we don't want it anymore. What's the end game? Mutual destruction, nuclear war. Because if they keep poking the bear, this is what's going to happen. Like, Greater Israel is dead. It's not going to happen. And hopefully I'm alive to see, I pray I'm alive to see, these people get their justice. But there you go.